So today's lesson is going to be on stress. And stress really goes hand in hand with our last lesson of psychological health. Stress is something that can permeate every single part of the college experience. So we need to think about it. We need to think about what causes us stress, and then how do we manage it? How do we be proactive in managing our stress? So let's go back to the why are we talking about this? So why is this a relevant topic to talk about in college? So we have done this survey for many years called the National College Health Assessment. We do it at Wake Forest, but it's also done at colleges across the country. So across the country, you can see there was over 47,000 students who took this assessment. And of those students, 34% of them reported that stress was the leading factor affecting their academic performance. 88%, let's be honest, almost all of them, felt overwhelmed by all they had to do. And then 62% felt overwhelming anxiety. So of those 48,000, about 782, I believe, were Wake Forest students. So think about if we look at just those Wake Forest students as their own independent sample. What do you think happens to these numbers? Do you think they stay the same, go down, go up? If you said go up, you are correct. We went up on all accounts. So almost 40% of our students reported stress was a leading factor. Almost all of our students felt overwhelmed by all they had to do. 63% felt overwhelming anxiety. So it's clear that stress is a pretty common college experience. So then we ask students, okay, so most of you are feeling stress. So how much stress are you feeling? So on a national level, about 56% of students felt either more than average or tremendous stress. So of course this was self-report, but they feel like they're feeling more stress than the average student. If we look again just at Wake Forest, that number jumps up to about 62%. So again, college is a very, very stressful experience, and it can really permeate everything we do. So let's go back to the beginning and let's actually just define stress. So what is it? So stress is a mental and physiological response to something that is threatening us. So that's the key to stress. There's both a mental response and there's a physical response. So the mental response might be anxiety or worry, and the physiological response might be something like headaches or stomach aches, right? But there's always both. There's always both responses. The stressor then is a thing that is causing you stress. So anything can be a stressor. A stressor might be really something small, like something annoying, or it can be really, really big, like a traumatic life event. But whatever the thing that's producing the stress response, that is the stressor. So you may have written some of these down on your paper when I asked you what caused you stress. But the most common college stressors, things like academic pressure, social pressure, maybe a lack of social support, lack of sleep, money, building new relationships. That can be hard, right? Body image, time management. I mean, all of these can be overwhelmingly stressful. They kind of have a snowball effect to become overwhelmingly stressful. Here's the good news though, and you've probably heard this before. Not all stress is bad. Actually, we have to have some stress. There's two kinds of stress. So we have our eustress. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff that actually allows us to grow, presents an opportunity for personal satisfaction. So we need to have some stress. But when we talk about stress, what we tend to think about is the distress. That's the stuff that has a negative effect on our health. That's the stuff that causes us tension and strain. That's the stuff we tend to hold on to the longest. So while some stress can be positive, we tend to typically focus on the distress. So here's how this works, and you've probably seen something like this before, but take a look at this chart. So on the left-hand side, you have performance. Let's just say that's academic performance. And on the bottom, you have stress level. So what happens if you have no stress? You're not very motivated, right? You may not actually perform very well. You have to have some stress to motivate you, to focus you, to let you perform at your peak. Now, once you get past that healthy level, then you start to get fatigued and exhausted and panicked and maybe angry and burnt out. So we have to figure out how much stress is motivating to us, how much stress can we handle, and learn to manage all the rest. We can actually change how we perceive stress, and that's a good thing. So a lot of times our natural inclination is to be very reactive to stress, right? We see stress as something that's threatening us. We use language like, I can't handle this, I can't do this, it's too much. When instead, when possible, we should see stressors as challenges and say things like, okay, I'll find a way to do this. I'll use strategies and I'll find a way to overcome this as a challenge rather than as something that's threatening us. So we see it as an opportunity to get better rather than a threat. Now, not all stress is predictable, right? There's certainly things like traumatic events that we can't be proactive, we can't plan ahead. But whenever possible, and a lot of our stressors in college are possible to be proactive, things like academic pressure, tests, exams, classwork, right? We can plan ahead for those. So be proactive towards your stress rather than reactive. So again, reactive coping takes place after the stressor. It sees the stressor as a threat. We're saying things like, I can't do it. Proactive coping takes place before the stressor. We see the stressor as a challenge, and we say things like, I can, I choose, I will. Let's find an alternative. We're going to spend the rest of the time looking at distress and how distress actually affects us. So it's important to understand that there's two types of distress. You have acute distress and you have chronic distress. Acute distress is stress that only lasts for a short time. There's no permanent health damage. We actually experience chronic distress all the time. So let me give you maybe a silly example. Let's say that I'm trying to get my kids ready to go somewhere and I just need them to get their shoes on, but nobody can find their shoes and we're looking frantically for shoes and it's causing us all a little bit of distress. Maybe my heart's racing a little bit. We just need to get out the door, but eventually I find my kids' shoes, we put them on their feet, we're good to go, right? That is not stress that is going to impact me in the long run, okay? That is an acute distressor. Chronic distress, however, is the stress that lingers with us for a longer amount of time. Maybe it is, a really hard class that you have right now, or maybe it's a, difficult relationship that you're in, or a job you don't like, or something that is always there and always sticks with you, right? That's the distress that eventually wreaks havoc on the body system. Our body's response to stress is called the general adaptation syndrome. And in general adaptation, there are 3 stages. There's the alarm stage, the resistance stage, and the exhaustion stage. So the alarm stage is your body's response to that acute stressor. So something happens, your body responds very strongly, your heart maybe starts to race, your visual perception gets a little bit better, your blood pressure increases, your body releases some stress hormones, epinephrine, which is adrenaline, cortisol. What does cortisol do? It actually dumps blood sugar into your system. It prepares you to kind of run away. This is the fight or flight response, right? This is your body's natural defense mechanism against something that is threatening you. This is a good thing. Let's say that you are out hiking in the wilderness and you come across a bear. Right? You want your body to react strongly, right? You want to have energy to maybe run away. So fight or flight, that's a good thing. Here's the problem. Our body actually knows no difference between being chased by a bear and the stress that you feel when you're in that really hard class, right? Or that really difficult relationship. Often our body's response is very similar in terms of hormonal response and your heart rate and your blood pressure. But that relationship, that class, it doesn't just go away, right? Hopefully that bear would go away. But you're going to enter into what we call the resistance stage. So here, your body is trying to combat this stressor, and you're staying in this higher level of resistance. So you're functioning way above where your body wants to function, which we all know is called homeostasis. And we're constantly bombarded with stress hormones. Well, what's the problem? We can't stay in this indefinitely. So after some amount of time, our body's actually going to fall into the exhaustion stage. We're going to fall below the normal level of resistance, and this is when we start to get sick. This is when we start to see that wear and tear on our body. So we have to find ways to manage stress so that we're not staying in that resistance stage, right? And we're functioning at our normal level of resistance. How we react to stress is different for everybody. It might affect your mind, your body, your emotions, your behavior. But remember, the key is that stress is both a mental and a physical response. So take a minute to think about, how does stress affect you? What are some of your clues that you are stressed? Maybe it's headaches, maybe it's muddled thinking, maybe you can't sleep, but take a second and think, how does stress really affect me?